waiting. When will you find me? See, I'm waiting, maybe all my life for you. Thank you.
Thank you. You have to excuse me. I'm revealing the abundance of the divine. I'm profoundly aware of it today, this time of year when Spirit just lets loose with the pollen. I seem to feel that amazingly strongly. So I'm a little goofy looking and feeling, but that's okay. That's never stopped me before. So grateful to be together this morning as we enter into another phase of spiritual growth and development. We're looking at an idea this month around spiritual guidance and personal responsibility. And it's an interesting thing to know that our lives don't really work until we're willing to accept responsibility for them. I know. Should I have warmed up to that? Should I just lay it out there first, or kind of work my way around? But we all know this. We all know this, and yet if you're like me, sometimes you'd much rather blame. Sometimes you'd rather make it about something other than yourself. And I want us to hear this. When we speak of personal responsibility, we are not talking about blame. We're not talking about shame. We're not talking about guilt. It's just the recognition that we are creative beings within a divine intelligence. We are not separate from the creative source of all that is, but rather we are one with it. And therefore, if this creative intelligence is working through all of creation, it would imply that it is working through us. And so what I came to understand as I began this journey is that the thing that I could control in my life was me. Now, I had tried all kinds of other approaches. I tried manipulating other people. I tried manipulating circumstances. I tried manipulating situations, thinking that somehow I would have a greater experience of life. But until I realized that the only piece that I had some degree of control over was what was happening between these ears of mine. And when I began to understand that, then I could move in a new direction and I could begin creation from a different level. So many of us have grown up with a concept that the divine God, Mother, Father God, whatever you want to call that, is somehow outside of us and separate from us, right? And when we grow up with that concept, we are, in effect, moving into a realm of overcoming, trying to overcome God's reluctance to giving me what I want. But when we understand that the universe, the entire universe is working through us according to our own belief system, our own consciousness, then we recognize a much easier path is to simply work at the inner level first so that we can be a place that is making welcome a greater experience of life. It is a fundamental shift in thinking. And until we make that shift, life's a lot more about struggle than about flow, right? So I decided somewhere along the way that I wasn't digging struggle anymore. Even though I had perfected it, I wasn't loving it. And so I began to look at what would a life look like that was working with the universe, working with intelligence. Somewhere along the way, well, as a young person, I tried to avoid conflict. I used to think that conflict was bad and therefore to be avoided. And when I did that, I always wanted to play the peacemaker. Even as the youngest of 5 children, which I'm understanding is not the normal role, but my role was, can't we all just get along? Or can't we at least act sanely for some period of time, right? Apparently the answer was no, but nonetheless, it was worth a shot, right? And so even as I grew up and came into a more mature approach to life, even going into my first ministry, I realized that I was still playing that role. Like, can't we all just get along? And the thing that happens out of that, what I've discovered, is that sometimes when we are trying to be right, trying to avoid conflict, we can move into inauthenticity. We don't say what's on our heart to say. We don't express our real needs, our real feelings, our real emotions, lest we upset someone. Right? And then what we create out of that is an inauthentic life. And it looks good on the surface until it doesn't. Because life has a way of giving us a little slap upside the head when we finally need it. So stop already with the denial. Stop already with the avoidance. Move into a more authentic approach to living. In my circumstances, it created an amazing, not just a little slap upside the head, but a 2x4 that really got my attention and said, wow, I've got to do life differently. And somewhere along the line, I came in contact with a wonderful book. I highly recommend it, which is called The Magic of Conflict by Thomas Crum. And Thomas Crum was the first person that really helped me to see conflict in a new way. He talked about everything in the natural universe and then in nature that we say is so beautiful is some form of conflict. If you think about it, the Grand Canyon, one of the great wonders of the earth, is the conflict of water and earth. Water's winning, by the way, right? That there's a conflict. And that when we really naturally understand this, we see that there are opposing forces always in working. But he brought a perspective to working with conflict from a martial arts point of view. He was a Aikido instructor. And I'm not a martial arts person. I know it's hard to believe this, but it's true. But he teaches this idea that in Aikido, what you're doing is you're working with your opponent's energy. So when someone comes at you, rather than fight them, rather than resist them, rather than trying to block that energy, you move with their energy and thereby disarm them using their energy, not yours. I know, cool, huh? Makes me want, in fact, let's have a demonstration. Who's ready to? I've always wanted to do that. Let me just flip you over. Let's see how that works. Right? But it's a great idea because what do we do often when we get into conflict? What we do is I'm ready. Jesus taught us, resist not evil. Very powerful statement. I never understood this as a young person. It wasn't until much older that what I began to realize is what he was saying to us is when we focus on what is wrong, when we focus on what is broken, what we focus on what is not right, what we do is that we lock into that energy. It's a great phrase that says, what we resist persists. And if you've ever noticed in your life the things that you have the most resistance to continue to live in your life. It's almost as if they feed off the energy, right? So this began to help me understand that there was another approach to living life, not only in when conflict was happening. Rather than avoid it, it was to embrace it. Rather than to go inauthentic, it was to get real. Now, there's some skills that go along with that. You see, sometimes people talk about, let's just be brutally honest with each other. And I don't think that's necessary. I think there's a way to be compassionately honest with one another. I think there's a way to be lovingly honest with each other. But at some point, we need to be honest. And so when we learn to do this, when we learn to value our feelings and our unique experience of life and share that from a place of love, then something new can happen. When energy is coming at us, rather than block the energy, rather than fight the energy, we can flow with the energy. An Oriental sage said that the yielding is more powerful than the resistant is a fact known by all and practiced by none. We say that again. That the yielding is more powerful than the resistant is a fact known by all and practiced by none. We know there is a place for surrender in our lives. We know there's a place for allowing in our lives. We know there's a place for opening up. And yet, sometimes we want to go to battle with the forces of life. And as I always like to say, how's that working for you? Is it getting you closer to a peaceful, joyful life, or is it still about struggle? So the first thing we have to be willing to do is to embrace the responsible life. We often talk about the stages of spiritual growth and evolution, and all of us, as we're moving through this, will move from that first state of consciousness which says life is happening to me. Sometimes we take the approach that, I grew up in a philosophy and a teaching that basically said if you suffer well this life, the rewards are on the other side. There was a whole lot of caveats to that, I got to say. There was a lot of conditions around that, but nonetheless, right? So there was almost an implication that you should suffer through this life. I brought a lot of that into my adulthood, and trust me, I was very good at it. I can do victim like you've never seen before. Right? Poor, pitiful me. Why is this happening to me? Those bad people do it to me. Wah. And that works if you want to have a life that doesn't work, If you want to have a life that doesn't work, that works great. If you want to have a life that's fulfilling and empowered, then we take step one, which is to accept responsibility for our place in the creation of everything that's happening in our life. I always say that when I look at the totality of my life, I realize there's one common denominator, and it was that I was there for all of it. It's the one thing that remained the same. People came in, people went out, jobs changed. I was there. So at some level, I must have something to do with it. At some level. And it turns out that the level that I can do something about it is about me. So, we're releasing the need to blame ourselves or others. We're releasing the need to feel guilty. I often say that sometimes we're, a little bit of guilt is okay. When we make a mistake, we should have some twinge of conscience around that. But most of us have a really highly overdeveloped sense of guilt. And we're still carrying things that we did wrong as young people, and some of us aren't that young anymore. So, right? Like, I shouldn't have been, I shouldn't have been. At some point, we find forgiveness and we choose to take those lessons and move forward with new possibility, with new insight, with new wisdom. And that is what forgiveness provides for us, is that we can take the lessons of living and build on them and move forward. We don't want to keep repeating the same thing over and over and over. You can. But again, do you want to have a life of struggle, or do you want to have a life of being empowered? So as we're moving forward and we're accepting responsibility for the creation of our life, to the degree that we are able to see it, sometimes things just happen, but more than not, we always find ourselves at a moment of choice. That whatever's happening in my life, I do have a choice of how I show up. Do I bring forth greater love, forgiveness, compassion, or do I move to a lower level of being? Having accepted responsibility, it is then that we can move into this place of spiritual guidance. And what I know is we all have spiritual guidance. I know this. Why? Because we're all spiritual beings. What I recognize, particularly in the Western societies, is that we have two mental faculties. We have the faculty of logic. Logic's a wonderful thing. Logic allows us to analyze and deduce and to plan and to strategize and do all kinds of wonderful things. It's highly developed in the Western world. And so we don't need to be rid of logic, but we do need to recognize there's another capacity that we all have, which is the intuitive side of our being. Sometimes we just know, right? We just know. And what's interesting for me as I've developed over the years in my spiritual work, I think, is as we do the spiritual work, our prayer, our meditation, our visioning, doing those things that center us and ground us in spirit, then that intuitive capacity becomes more developed and we trust it more. So for me, it's interesting that I now trust more my intuitive guidance than I do my logical. In fact, my logical often seems to want to argue for limitation. Sometimes I've been called by Spirit to do something, and it's like, well, that makes no sense. I remember getting a call from a little group in Salt Lake City saying, would you come talk to us about our ministry? I lived in Idaho. 4.5 hours away. And they said, would you be our minister for a while? I said, yes. That makes no sense at all. And not only will you be our minister for a while, we're not going to pay you very much money to do it. Hello, count me in. Does that make sense? Of course it doesn't make sense. Did I do it? Of course I did. Because the intuitive part of me knew exactly that it was my next step. You see, when we start to, I'm not saying throw out logic, I'm not saying throw out intuition. I'm saying that what we start to do is we learn to balance those energies. I just tend to know that my spiritual life, I can trust it. I can trust it. It guides me. And I don't always understand it, but I know when I feel that I'm being called to the next level or to the next thing, I can either, here's what I discovered with this, is that I can either surrender now or I can struggle and surrender later. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you had this experience? I'm all praying to God, God, what should I do? What should I do? What should I do? And God says, do this. I'm like, no. God, I'm going to try a different God. That's why I like all these different religions, Let's see what Brahma has to say about this, Yahweh's clearly not working. Let's go see what, right? And then you get it and you resist it, and then finally you just go, okay, right? So somewhere along the way I discovered, I could just skip the whole struggle piece in between and just say, okay, I surrender, which again is not giving up, it is opening up to our greater possibility. Was reminded of a wonderful story, because you see what I sense and what I feel, not only personally but in our world, and it seems like everybody I'm talking to, is we're in such a transitional time. It is just like, our old paradigm is falling away, and so when that happens, it's discomforting, it's disconcerting, because we like life to be stable. We like life to be known. We like to have things just the way we are. In fact, I was sharing it at the earlier service. So right now it may, cool. It's 12:05. Yes. Now, if you weren't at the first service, you have no idea why that's a big deal. But right now, and really for the last 2 weeks, it has always been 12:05. Because I have an old-fashioned watch that you have to change the battery from time to time, and apparently the battery's given up. So you say, well, why are you wearing a watch that doesn't work? You idiot. I know you're thinking it. I'm just saying what I know you're thinking. Why do you suppose that I wear a watch that doesn't work? Habit. It feels weird not to have my watch on. And I keep looking at it right now. Oops, no longer 12:05, so we got to wait till tonight, right? Now, I will go get a new battery and, move into the thing. But, I just had to chuckle at myself because I keep putting the watch on. Every day I look and it's like still 12:05. I put it on and I go about my day because it feels weird not to. Now, I know you're judging me, but I'm judging you even as you do this because you do this in other ways. Right? We keep playing out a pattern that we know doesn't work. Works twice a day for 1 minute. Otherwise, it's not working, right? That's why I say the challenge of this teaching, we just say, change your thinking, change your life. Cool. Boom. And all of us have instantaneous demonstrations and life's forever different. Or more incremental, right? Because changing our thinking turns out is a little bit harder than we had imagined. And it takes practice, and it takes discipline, and it takes an ongoing commitment to embrace a different way of being. So when we're in these times of transition and it feels like we're part of me steps back and looks at the election that is going on right now as this amazing metaphor for about everything in one way or another, and just go, wow, this is fascinating, right? But as we're in this place of change and transformation and transition, it's a very discomforting thing. How many of you are feeling like your old way of being is not really here anymore, but the new hasn't quite arrived? You're like, oh man, this is really uncomfortable. I was reading Alan Cohen, and I came across this line, and I just love it. He said, so when we're in this place, it's as if we have left our history, but not yet claimed our destiny. Do you feel that? Like I've left my history, but come on. Come on, destiny, get in here. And what we need to do is to realize that during such transitional times, we have to mobilize our faith. And to realize that it's only a matter of time until our aspiration becomes our reality. That which we focus on becomes our experience. My friend Larry Sheff, wonderful part of the community, I'm going to talk about you here, drove up in a brand new red Nissan truck, right? Now, he says a monster truck, no less. No, I don't think it quite qualifies. And he tells me, he said, yes, I created that in Prosperity Plus. Remember when we did our vision? He put a vision. And so now, today, he drives up in the truck that looks exactly like the vision that he posted. How is that possible? Because he's lucky. He got a special bonus set of spiritual laws and principles, right? Now, what I wanted to explain to him is that in the Prosperity Plus class, we make a commitment to tithing. So what that implies is that I get to drive his truck 10% of the time. Keep on demonstrating, baby. Keep on doing. Right? So here's my point about this, right? Is that the vision doesn't have to exist yet. But we have to know what our vision is, and we have to stay focused on the vision. We don't have to know all the hows and the whats and the whys of all of it, but we have to be clear on our vision. You see, what life is calling us to do right now is to be in that place of greater possibility, to expand our possibilities, to expand what we believe is personally possible for each one of us. And if we can learn to let go and we can learn to trust the process, then we can appreciate and allow the universal spiritual principles to work through us to bring forward our greater good. You see, it's an interesting thing because at one level, we have to claim responsibility for our lives. We have to own it. Let go of the judgment of whether it's good or bad, but just say, this is my creation. This is what I have created in my life. And if I want that to be different, then I start to work towards a new vision. And interestingly, as we move through the process, part of having claimed it, now we have to release it. Isn't that fascinating? We have to then surrender and go, okay, let the divine intelligence work through me. It's a constant reminder for me to know that this intelligence which created the entire universe, which brought all things into being, which is expressing through and as all of life as we know it, may have a bigger and better idea for my life. Maybe. It's a constant lesson. But as I'm willing to surrender to that idea, and I realize, as the Oriental sage said, that yielding is more powerful than resisting. Taking that idea of the energies that are coming at me, rather than fight them, I work with them. I transform them. I transmute them. It's a different way of approaching reality. But sometimes our thinking is limited, or we don't see the whole picture. I'm thinking about the man who was driving around. There was a mountain, steep hill on one side, steep cliff on the other. 2-lane road. And so as he's going around the corner, this woman, of course it was a woman, I just had to. Okay, this gender unidentified person was driving around the corner in his lane and yelled out the window, "Pig!" in my lane, calling me names. So he looked at her and said, "Cow," and came around the corner and hit a pig and killed himself. I know, I'm sorry, that had nothing to do with anything we're talking about. I just like the story. No, it does have to do with sometimes things aren't the way they seem. Sometimes the universe is giving us a signal. Sometimes we want to be offended instead of receiving the guidance and taking a different approach. So I find it an amazing time to be alive. I find it an amazing time to be witnessing what is taking place in our world. A part of me wants to freak out. But the spiritual self, the self that I know and trust, knows that all things are working together for a greater good. And that I'm always a choice as to how I want to show up in the world. What do I want to bring forward? What is my personal vision and mission for how will I live my life? And so I choose love. I choose joy. I choose harmony. I choose peace. Because I know that's what radiates from me. And lo and behold, if that's not what returns to me. It's a cool universe we live in. It is a universally known thing that what goes around comes around. What we put out comes back to us. Every tradition teaches some version of that. We might do well to practice. Just saying. When everything else fails, why not, right? Why not surrender? So I don't know where you are in your life. My guess is that some of you are sitting in that same place where your history is no more, and your destiny isn't quite yet. And what do? We pray, and we practice. So let us begin in prayer now. As we turn inward, honoring and acknowledging this one life, this one presence, this one divine infinite being. And we recognize that life is the very source and substance of all that is. That this divine intelligence that delights in its self-expression, the one life we call God, is expressing in, through, and as all of creation. And so we open ourselves to the recognition of the truth of who we are. We remember in this moment that we are spiritual beings. And because we are one with the source, that which is true for the whole is true for each one of us. The qualities of peace, of joy, of love, of harmony are our life right here and right now. And so as we breathe into that awareness, we're simply recognizing and allowing the presence of wholeness to reveal itself as health and well-being and vitality. We're allowing the presence of divine love to reveal itself, to uplift our hearts, to transform and transcend our relationships. We find it easy to forgive, to release, to let go of that which no longer serves us, and to embrace a greater possibility. We recognize and know that we are abundant beings right here and right now. We enter into that state of divine flow, graciously giving and generously receiving of divine bounty. Our lives are filled and overflowing with every good thing. We give thanks for the many blessings of our lives. We release gently and lovingly those things which no longer serve us. And we allow something new and powerful to emerge, to be born through us right here and now. And so in this moment of awareness, we are giving thanks for the many blessings of our lives, the infinite blessings. And as we open ourselves, as we give thanks for these blessings, it's only natural to extend blessings. We bless this spiritual community, this divine idea unfolding in grace and in love and in joy and in abundance, divinely guided, serving powerfully. We extend a blessing to our brothers and sisters around the planet. We are remembering that we are but one human family. And while we celebrate diversity, we know that there is no other. So we are celebrating a world that works for all. We're honoring a planet at peace that is in harmony with itself. And as always, we bless all priests, rabbis, ministers, teachers of every faith, For we know there are many pathways to the divine. We honor and celebrate that spiritual diversity. We know that it is good. And so in joy and gratitude, I'm simply giving thanks for all of these blessings. I know that as we enter into this state of consciousness, the law of mind operates upon the thought that we have established here. So I know there's nothing more to do but to release this word into that law, to know and accept it as done and complete in perfect timing and in divine right order. In joy and gratitude, then, I simply allow it to be so, as together we say, and so it is.